Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Mike and Molly. Mike, I feel like this is one of our most anticipated episodes by students for sure, but also by us. I'm ready to get on my high horse because today we're talking MCAT questions.
I know. This comes off really because just a few episodes ago we chatted about reading MCAT passages, and I think I mentioned this before, but this is probably some of the highest yield stuff we can talk about. We talk about like high yield content all the time, but nothing will get you more points, hands down, than having a proper question strategy.
Especially the questions. I mean,
right.
Passage read is great, but if you read the passage perfectly and you don't understand the question, your score is based on the question.
Right. I ask this all the time, like, even with my students, I'm like, okay, we have a great passage strategy. Amazing. You understand the passage perfectly. Like, it's as if you wrote this thing. How many points has the AMC awarded you? Zip. None.
Well,
you get
potentially zero, right?
But potentially zero. Where the points come is in the questions. And it's kind of one of those like strategy pieces where one piece of the strategy is sort of, I say quote unquote, this extreme, dead without the other. You need a good passage strategy in order to utilize question strategy. But you also need a good question strategy to best utilize the passage strategy, right? They kind of go hand in hand. You can't just have one without the other. But I feel like so many strategies that people follow, I don't know if this is you, always focus on how to read the passage. Like, what should you do in reading the passage? But then I ask students all the time, I meet one-on-one with students all the time. I'm like, okay, what's your question strategy? And it's like a question mark over their head. They're like, what do you mean a question strategy?
Just answer the question.
I just answer the questions.
Huh?
But this makes so much sense because throughout our lives, throughout, in undergrad and high school, even before then, we never actually had to have a formal question strategy. We kind of just did it. And, those people who consider themselves good test takers have good habits, but they don't have a formalized question strategy. But then
There's
they
no
struggle.
intention.
If there's no intention, the word, we have to say that word like every episode. They don't have a good intention or an intentional strategy when it comes to MCAT questions. And that's why we struggle. That's why the average score on this exam is a 500. Right? Even though Reddit makes it seem like a 520, right? It is a 500 because everyone kind of goes into it with their kind of content, their kind of like undergrad, high school mindset. But if you want to level up, if you want to have a question strategy that'll get you to those 510, 515, 520 scores with which you and I, Molly, know very, very well, you need to have a really good question strategy. So that's why I'm excited for what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I feel like it's important to address the fact that, like you said, we are trained to perform on undergrad tests, on high school tests, on AP tests, whatever. And some of those tests are multiple choice, some of them aren't. If you have a test that's not multiple choice, obviously you need to know the answer to the question and you need to be able to explain it. Or if it's a math question, you need to be able to show all of your work. Like, you have to have all of the knowledge in your head. Very few undergrad courses or, high school courses especially have passages. So you don't have any help. And sometimes you need to have all of that information stored in your brain with no hints, right? MCAT is completely different. And I feel like we've hit on the difference between the MCAT and undergrad in many of our different episodes, especially our strategy, but content too, right? Completely different that you have a passage that's presenting new information that actually is rich with clues that will help you with the questions, which is why we did our episode 2 weeks ago on how to read a science passage.
Right.
Definitely go back and check it out if you haven't already. But also the questions are a lot more, they're very elusive. Their meaning, right? The phrasing can be really, really complex. Sometimes the question stem gives you new information, but then you also have 4 answer choices to pick between, right? You don't need to be able to regurgitate the answer, right? It's not a short answer test. It's an elimination test. Can you pick the best out of the 4, given the information you have in your head, but also the information and the clues you have in the passage, right? So this is why we talk about it. I feel like when we approach it, just like we've approached every other test we've ever taken, we're going to fall for every possible trap. If we approach it a little differently, and ultimately the strategies we're going to talk about today can apply to any section, including cars for the most part, structurally very different from sciences, but the same principles apply. you can really, really see significant improvements in your score.
Right. And it's shocking
It's
sometimes, really.
shocking.
Right. How just these tiny changes, is really intentional changes, can make
Ah,
huge differences in a student's score. And it's so interesting, especially when you talk about, we're kind of conditioned and trained to go about questions in the same way. And it's so interesting. You and I, we've seen thousands of students, thousands easily.
right.
But
Hmm.
they all like so many students, just so many backgrounds, different GPAs, all make the same mistakes. Like
Yeah,
genuinely, you see
literally.
the same mistakes
The
over
patterns,
and over. The
right?
patterns are all the same. And again, you can't help but like realize that this is what the AMC intends. Like, you think they don't know that their questions are meant to make you make these mistakes? And I like kind of going over like what mistakes we see
Yes.
all the time, so that anyone who's listening is like, we will talk about mistake I can promise you've made, so that
Yeah.
every step of our question strategy is meant to address these mistakes, to make sure that you don't fall into the traps that the AMC is setting for you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the first mistake, this is probably the one that so many people can feel viscerally, and I know I do, is
Yeah.
you're going through a question, right? You read the question and you were able to eliminate two really, really kind of like really easily, but then you're stuck between two and you're like, both of these could be right. Both of these could be right. You're stuck between you and you're like just stuck. Which one? And then like technically you should have a 50-50 shot, but you should get these kinds of questions wrong. Like, you should be getting them 50% of the time statistically, but you always get these kinds of questions wrong where you're
Yeah.
stuck between two and you choose the wrong one. I
Yeah.
felt that one so to my core. That would always be me, where I'm stuck between two, and it was so frustrating. And you see
Frustrating.
this
Yeah.
so often. This is where I'm like, the AMC knows that they're doing this to you. They know that. But because we see this so often, there's some really good tricks to help with something like that. But I mean, I know, Molly, how often do you see like something like that?
Oh my gosh, all the time. And I feel
Hmm.
like students don't even recognize a lot of the times that it is a strategic thing that they could learn to
Hmm.
avoid. So many
Hmm.
students, when you're stuck between two and then you pick the wrong one, they call it a silly mistake. They're like, oh, well, I knew that one was
Mm-mm.
also a good option. I probably would have picked the other one. I read the solution. That's the right one. No, right? Like you
Hmm.
were stuck.
Hmm.
You were stuck to the point that you guessed.
Hmm.
That's a question you want to look at again,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like that is a really important thing. And we have different tips that we'll talk about, right?
Hmm.
Quick 1 second suggestion is make sure you take a look at the answer or the question again. Maybe
Hmm.
two things are true, but maybe one answers the
Hmm.
question better. We'll talk about lots of more in-depth strategies, but this one I think, in the course I teach CARS office hours, and I also teach a general office hours for just like
Hmm.
general strategy advice and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
this question I get constantly.
Right.
And I feel like again, it's not something that we even register as like a mistake. Like I've done something wrong. And it's not that you're doing something wrong. It's just that there are strategies that can help eliminate that feeling, that incredibly
Hmm.
common experience that every student has had at least
Hmm.
500 times.
At least 500 times.
Literally at least 500 times.
And there's even a word that you just said that like made me like shrivel to my core, which is the word silly mistake. I
I know.
I despise that word. I will die on this hill. There's
Mhm.
no such thing
There's
as a
no
silly
silly
mistake.
mistakes.
There's no such thing. There
Maybe you were
are
tired.
they're real, and there's
Yeah.
always a reason. There's no such thing as a silly mistake. There are real mistakes that we can fix. But
Yeah.
as soon as we say something's a silly mistake, we're like, oh, we read the solution. I get it, I'll get it next time. But we don't change anything.
No.
Right? So if you don't change anything, will something differently happen next time?
Mm-mm.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Mm.
not. So I fell into this mistake. I did this so many times. But when I'm working with students or teaching the classes, I teach the 515 course now, I make sure to outline very clearly there's no such thing as silly mistakes. They're only real mistakes that you can fix.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and some mistakes are easier to fix than others,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
maybe it was a quick thing that you forgot because you were fatigued. Okay, well you can get additional practice with timed practice sets. So you could work on the endurance aspect so you're not as fatigued next time.
Hmm.
That's important. Or maybe you missed a unit and now you come out of that with an intention. That needs to be something I check first.
Hmm.
Right? I didn't realize that I had the right number but the wrong unit. I should have been focusing on this. You have a way to take action on that, right? Like
Right.
silly mistakes are not silly because in a testing environment, you made it and you're likely to make it again in the next time you see it, unless you take action on it.
And
Um,
actually change something. 100%.
yeah.
100%.
And that's super important. And I feel like sometimes when we kind of get between two and we're feeling like it's this one over this one, and sometimes even when we confidently pick one, another thing that I see all the time is, especially in cars, but in general, is a student just says, nope, that's not the correct answer. They check the answer, they get the question wrong, and they're like, literally, no. This
Yeah,
is especially true in cars,
especially true
which
in
is
cars.
why we have very specific car strategies that help make the subjective objective, which is pretty awesome. But a lot of the times students are just like, literally, no, this
No,
is not the
right.
correct answer. The one that I chose is the correct answer. And you shut yourself off from any learning opportunities because you've
Right.
decided that you were right and they're wrong. And now you have a very closed mind, right? Like you need to figure out, why are they saying this is right? How make it make sense, right? You
Right.
need to dig deeper because you confidently chose an answer, or maybe you didn't, maybe you were unconfident, but you confidently chose an answer that wasn't the answer selected by the AMC or by whoever wrote the question. You need to dig deeper and find out why, right? Set the ego aside. You missed one question. That's okay, right? The only true mistake is the one that you don't learn from. That's
Absolutely.
my favorite quote. And
Oh,
I'm sure I've
truly.
butchered it, but
Yeah. Hey, you know what? The sentiment was there. The
the
vibes
sentiment
were.
is there.
Hey, we
Yes.
only go off vibes here. Not unless we're talking about question strategy. No vibes there. There's very firm strategies, but vibes on everything else. And I think that point where it's like you look, because again, all these mistakes, by the way, I know I've made a
I've
million.
made, yeah.
I made
Everyone
all
makes
these
them.
mistakes. Everyone makes them. That's why we want to address them. But I think this also comes onto an assumption that I know I kept on making, right? Where I would look at the answer option, the right answer, and I would say, like, I don't see why that's right, or I don't agree that that is the right answer. And I think this is an assumption that we carry in because the assumption that's worked for us in the past, that the MCAT owes us. They owe us that there will always be a right answer that you'll agree with. Right, that's an assumption. I always ask this in I teach like a science strategy FTS, a free trial session. And I ask the class, like, does the AMC owe you that there is always a right answer that you agree with? They don't owe you that. They do not owe you that. Every other institution you've been to has owed you that, right? Where you can argue with the professor. But that's not the MCAT, that's not the AMC. But this is an objective exam. It's objective, right? There's undoubtedly one answer that is not wrong.
It's the least wrong.
It's the least wrong, right? And there's one answer that's the least wrong, or in my opinion, it cannot be wrong in any way, but there's three answer options that are wrong objectively. Objectively. There are three answer options that are objectively wrong, and one answer option that you might not like, right? You might not agree with, but it's not wrong. Therefore, I'm of the mindset, stop trying to focus on getting looking for the right answer, because it might not even be there. Don't, when you're reviewing, say, oh, I don't agree with the right answer. You don't have to. Just look at why the other answer options are wrong. And there probably was something that you picked, that thing that you thought was really right. There was something objectively wrong about it. That's what you should be focusing on, right? Focus on what's wrong, not, oh, do I like that? Is that the right answer? And this mistake, in my experience, disappears. Where it's like you stop fixating on not agreeing, because again, they don't owe you that.
Yeah. And I feel like it comes from when we have instincts that are good instincts of like, I read the question, I know the passage, I think this is going to be the answer. And then you see something that is very similar to what you anticipated. And you're like, yep, that's the answer. I was so smart. I figured that out before. I'm the best. Pat yourself on the back. You're feeling great. You go to the next question and you end up getting it wrong. And it's because you missed a word in there that made it wrong. Right? Like they will lead traps for you. And especially if you disagree with the correct answer, or you really feel your answer is right, look deeper on the way that they phrased that answer. Is there any extra word, a not, an always, a no? Is there any difference in the tone or in the language from the passage? Is there anything that's cast doubt on this, right? Because a lot of the times when we're looking for the right answer, instead of looking for why answers are wrong, we're going to feel like we're being cheated. Because there will be answers that have most of what you want, but extra stuff that makes it wrong. And that's the danger.
Right. And that's why if we're always looking for what's right, we focus on what we like. But if we shift our mindset, we're like, okay, I'm not even going to look for what's right. Let me look for what's wrong. It's like these things pop out at you, which is crazy. But we'll talk to like question strategy in a little bit. We'll hit on these points.
The actual steps But it's
These are
also
kind of,
nice to
it's
go
also
over the
nice to
things
kind of
that
like
we
preface
do.
them. 100%. And I think this kind of brings us well to the next thing when it comes to like missing things, when it comes to like our questions, where a lot of times we read the question, we feel like there's a time pressure, so I have to get through the question quickly. But we need to recognize we cannot skip question comprehension. We have to make sure that we are intentionally looking at the questions because I'm sure, again, I'm sure everyone's done this where we've read the question and we kind of just went straight to the answer options, but then we didn't even realize, we didn't even take the second to actually comprehend what the question was asking. So when we look at the answer, we were so overwhelmed. We were like, oh, I don't even know where I'm supposed to look. We get it wrong. We waste time. When in reality, oh, it was so simple. Right? If only I had just understood what the question was asking me, this would have been such an easy question. And we chalk that another one up to, oh, that's a silly mistake. Right?
Yeah. I I am way too passionate about this. I think this is the most underutilized skill across every, we've worked with thousands and thousands of students. I think this is the single most important skill that is also the least practiced, which is
absolutely.
making sure you understand the question that you're supposed to answer. Because if you don't, and sometimes I'll do this with students, especially that I know always skip it, even though we talked about it, I'll give them just 4 answers. I'm like, okay, what's the correct one? And they're like,
what? Of course I don't know.
They're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, which one's the correct answer? They're like, how could I know that? I don't have the question. And I'm like, isn't that
an issue?
Isn't that
right?
pretty cool? Yeah. Like if I don't have a question and I just am staring at 4 answers, maybe I have the passage. Maybe I'm like, this is from the passage and this I remember from my content, but like you are flying blind. You have no idea what's going on. And I think a lot of us intuitively overestimate our ability to read questions and understand the minute details. The thing is though, and again, undergrad exam questions are pretty straightforward. MCAT questions are not straightforward. There are so many little hints and turns as part of these MCAT questions, and it is worth the time to make sure you understand what the question is asking, right? Should I be pulling in background knowledge? Is there anything from the passage I could use? What am I expecting from my answers in terms of units, in terms of content focus, in terms of whatever, right? Like what criteria am I going to use to evaluate these 4 options? If you don't have that, maybe you have a little better than a 25% chance of guessing it right, but not much. Right? Like if you want high accuracy, you need to focus on the question. And I actually think, some students are like, Molly, it takes too long. If I want to focus on the question, if I want to truly understand every question, I need to spend 20, 30 seconds just staring at the question. And I'm like, okay, do it.
Do it.
Because once you know what the question's asking, it's going to take 5 seconds maximum to decide on an answer choice because you know what you're looking for. I feel incredibly strongly about this, and we'll talk more about it, but like this mistake is almost universal, and it's makes sense because of the way that we've been trained, but specifically for the MCAT, I think focusing on making sure you understand the question and what you're being asked to do, I think is one of the single most underutilized and important skills for the test.
Oh, 1,000%. And I think this goes back to even what we're talking about when it came to passage strategy, where a lot of the times we're in our mind, we're like, oh, but the time, but the time, but the time. I can promise you, like, even now, I don't think a second, not a single second in my mind passes where when I'm doing a passage, oh, I need to rush through this because of my timing. Right? Because what we find is when you actually take the time to read the passage well, as well as read the question well, you end up going faster.
Way
right?
faster.
Way
And higher
faster.
accuracy.
Right. And higher accuracy, which is everything what we want. It's so counterintuitive. But this is the quote we mentioned before, if you remember, if you watched the passage strategy episode, where slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Right?
I love that.
Quote. I love
still
that
love
quote.
that.
Right, where the slower, like, when you go slowly and intentionally through a question, you read it well and you read it once. You don't have to keep on rereading and you understand what you're looking for so that the speed that you go through the answer options, so quick. Yeah, everybody's like, oh, let me read through the question really quickly and then get stuck with the answer options and thinking, oh, but I had to save time, so I read the question quickly. It's so counterintuitive, but it works. So I know there's some people who be like, but Mike, Molly, I don't know about that. Try it. I
Yeah.
challenge you, try it. Take your
Mhm.
time, read the questions, use the strategies that we're going to talk about, and involved, you can kind of guess what we're going to be focusing on. Intentionality, hint, hint. And try it out, and you'll be shocked. Shocked. Again, I have students that wouldn't finish sections on time, but as soon as they started actually implementing strategy, they'd finish with like 10, 15 minutes. Like bio is a great one, where if you're struggling with timing, it's probably because you're rushing. Probably because you're rushing. Take your
Which
time,
is
you'll
so
finish
weird.
early. It's so counterintuitive, but it works. Oh my goodness, just try it, please.
Yes. That's like one of my favorite things to see is
Mhm.
how doing the exact opposite of what you're worried about ends up fixing your problem.
Oh my
But
goodness.
it's
Oh,
so, yeah.
it's so true. There's actually a great quote. Sorry, there's such a great quote. It's from Man's Search for Meaning. I love that
Okay.
book so much by Viktor Frankl. And the quote goes, the more you focus on something, the less likely you are to achieve it. Right? The
Hmm.
more you focus, because you're so focused on the thing that you're not thinking about the processes to achieve that thing. You're so
Yeah.
focused
When you're
on
focused on
time.
the outcome.
You're focused on the outcome. You're
Mhm.
not thinking, oh, what do I need to do in order to get that outcome? Right? If you're so
Mhm.
focused on timing, you're not going to actually do the things meant to get a good time. If you're so focused on the score, you're not going to focus on the strategies in order to actually get that score. So,
Mhm.
in order
That's
to get what you want, that outcome that you want, focus on the processes, not the outcome.
Yeah, that's also a huge point in Atomic Habits. It's like you
Mhm.
don't want to have a goal-oriented mindset. Like everyone listening to this podcast, if you're studying for the MCAT, or even if you haven't yet started, but you are interested in maybe applying to medical school in the future, everyone's goal is the same. It's get a
Mhm.
528. That
Mhm.
everyone has the same goal is I want the
Mhm.
highest score physically possible. You need to have a systems oriented mindset. How am I
Mhm.
actually going to get there? Because
Mhm.
everyone has their dream of a 528, or we'll generalize. Maybe we
Mhm.
want a top 2 percentile score, so a
Sure.
520 and up. Um, some people achieve that and some people don't. And you can guarantee that the people who are able to achieve those scores were not just, they don't have a printout of
I need
528 on
to.
the
I know.
wall and I want it and I'm going to just stare at it. No,
Right.
they're putting in the work.
Mhm.
They're being intentional,
Very intentional. It's like a
right? And
prerequisite.
reflecting and finding ways to grow because they're
Mhm.
focused on what can I do day in and day out for the next 4 months to actually get me to where I want to go.
Mhm.
It's the systems you have in place that will determine whether you're successful or not. You can have whatever goal that you want, but the goal doesn't determine whether you can achieve it, right? It's
Right.
how you actually work on it.
Mhm.
So all these kinds of strategies are things that if you invest in them, they will pay off,
Mhm.
right? But if you come from a place of fear or a place of denial
Mhm.
and you're like, I can't slow down. I can't try and understand. I can't do that. It's too hard, or I don't have enough time, or, I just don't want to, or I don't care about it, then it's
Right.
it's never gonna click.
Well,
So you've got to be finish my sentence.
intentional. You
Thank
have to. It's like we're
you.
reading each other. It's
I
just the
know.
word we. Oh, super, super. But when it comes to questions and strategy in general.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I feel like it goes in with our next, and again, we call them mistakes, but it's like a pitfall. It's something that so many people fall for,
Mhm.
and it's not intentionally made. It's something that oftentimes we're unaware of, but something that I also see happens a lot, and especially with students that call it a silly mistake, that
Mhm.
that bad word that we've
Oh, I
talked
just
about,
got chills. I just got chills. Yeah.
is misreading the question. So like, you've read the question, but maybe there was a word like a not or a least or
Mhm.
an except or something like that that changes the meaning of the question,
Mhm.
right? Or in cars, something like weakens or supports or agrees or disagrees. The ones that, okay, maybe we have some buzzwords, we've got some anchors to the passage or to our content. We kind of know the basics of what we want, but there's a word that changes the way that we should be approaching the question or what we're
Mhm.
looking in the answers. And oftentimes we just say, "Oh, I misread it. That's a silly mistake." And it's like, no, right? We read right past it. Maybe we were rushing. Maybe we weren't taking the time to reflect on the question. To be honest with you, if you're struggling with this, if you have a not question, mark it somehow, right?
Market
Don't
highlight. Oh,
highlight it.
actually,
Highlight the
right.
not. If there's a word that you always read over that changes the meaning,
Mhm.
don't let yourself read past it. It's too
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
Um, so misreading the question, I feel like really goes hand in hand with failing to, invest in that reading comprehension with the
Mhm.
question specifically, right?
Mhm.
Make sure you know your question. If you get anything from like the last 10 minutes of rant. It should be that.
Know your questions. Know your questions, and this exam goes so much more straightforward. I can promise you, I have seen students who, if they had just read their questions properly, easily could gain 5 to 10 points. It's not content. It's not content that they need, right? Sure, maybe they have content gaps, but that's not what's going to really get them the points. It's not, passage strategy. Maybe they even understand the passage, but they could easily get 5 to 10 points if they just read their questions properly, like understood the question every time. Because I'd even look at their review sheets and it's like, oh, misread the question. Oh, rephrase the question. Oh, misread it. Like, just read it properly, and you could have such a better score.
I know.
So anyway, that's just
Yeah.
sorry. That felt really you hit something there. Something got hit there. And I guess that also leads us to kind of the last kind of pitfall that we see, and it really does link back to what we said a lot in the previous strategy episode when it came to science passage strategy. But that's when you're looking at the questions, you read the question, maybe you understood it, you comprehended it, but then you prioritize your content over the passage. Right? Where this is a truth I always want everyone to set in their mind. The passage is always takes precedent. The
Yes.
passage always wins over your content, right? If your content and your passage are in contradiction to one another, which can happen, it will happen. I can promise you that, right? Always, the passage always wins, hands down. Right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people fall into this trap because they either skim the passage or they don't even read it in the first place, right? Where they just completely skip the passage, and then they go to questions, and the question looks like a content question where they just need their content. Oh, but they get it wrong because there was a detail in the passage that they didn't read or skipped over or skimmed over, right? And they're like, oh, oops, silly me. I was just supposed to have known that. No, right? Absolutely not. No, you need to change your strategy because it's as a result of your strategy that you made that error. So we see this all the time. The passage always takes precedent. And so you need, question strategy is and this is what I talked about before, question strategy is kind of dead without proper passage strategy because we can make pitfalls in our question strategy as a result of weak passage strategy. And if you're like, passage strategy, Mike, what are you talking about? We had an episode on that, like two episodes ago. So go check that out because that's really, really critical to getting these questions right.
Yeah. And I feel like this is really the mindset that you need to have, right? I mean, we've hit on mindset a couple times just in discussing the pitfalls and how to kind of circumvent them. But I think there are a couple things that we really need to just highlight. This is your mindset. This is how you should be thinking about it. The passage has not literally everything that you need, unless we're talking cars, in which case that is literal, but it is so rich with information, right? A lot of students think that they need to know this material and be able to perform on the questions like a professor in office hours, right? Like when we hold office hours or when a professor does in college, like you pretty much have to be a perfect expert about it because someone could come in and ask you some random little question and you need to be able to not just, like select the best answer. You need to be able to explain it. And if it doesn't click, then you need to explain it again. I think we expect ourselves to be able to synthesize the answers out of thin air for every MCAT question. And that is a huge pitfall, right? That's not the mindset you need to have. Your job is to pick the best out of 4 options with essentially a giant list of clues, right? I want you to think of yourself as a detective, not as a professor, right? You have the entire passage. Yes, a lot of this is new, right? Yeah, but a lot of it connects to things that you've seen before, right? You are an experienced veteran detective, right? Like you've seen passages like this before. You've seen content related to this before. You now have to answer questions. Your job is to pick the best of the 4, given everything that you know. The passage has so many clues. Okay. And I feel like this was one switch in mindset that I've seen create a bit of overnight success in many students. That's very rare. Overnight success. That's why we think about it so much.
Because it's like, oh, we saw them, right?
It's rare, but this is one of the things that I think can really change a student's perspective. Again, rephrasing the question, making sure you understand it, and prioritizing the passage first. And sometimes there's something that like it's kind of related to this part of the passage or more related to my content. Try the passage first. Get as far as you can with the passage information. And if there's nothing in the passage to help you eliminate, that's when you reach for content.
Exactly.
Right? It's there if you need it, but it's almost like, I mean, we said it before, it's necessary, but not sufficient.
Not sufficient.
Content is not enough to get you the score that you want. It's important. If you have no content background at all, it's going to be really hard to get through the questions, of course, but the passage really gives you so much valuable information.
Not only in the relationships that's there, but also in the priming that it gives you in terms of those clues, like the detective clues we were talking about before. It's like they give you so much. A lot of times we think, oh, is it all in the relationships? Is it all because of the experiment? No, even just the terms that they're using, right? They use the word amino acids, the buzzwords that we're talking about in our strategy, right? Well, they use certain terms to cue your mind for this question. Or, hey, they said the word inflammation. Oh, so now maybe I'm thinking about immune system now. Like these clues help you to think about the questions, even if it is a content question, right? You've already been primed because you already had the clues. So with the question, we were actually just joking about this before, Molly, how there is never, if it's a question associated with a passage, there is never going to be a case where a question is completely unrelated to the passage. Like not a chance, right? They even actually are like tied by that rule a little bit, where if they want to test something that's like really unrelated to what the passage was talking about, they'll give you like a whole paragraph in terms of the question there, or to like extend the paragraph out. But this is kind of an idea where, because every single question is related to the passage in some way, that rule that they owe you that. Again, this is always a rule. They owe you that. It behooves you more to actually read the passage, to actually get all the clues you need, so you're even more prepared for the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's just so critical. It's so critical. And I feel like it comes a solid passage read is going to set you up for a solid question approach. That's for sure. But again, focus on elimination, focus on understanding. We're going to go through a framework, right? Because we've kind of established what not to do,
Like the
right? And
mistakes
things that
people-
you may be experiencing now, but we want to go through start to finish. How can we set ourselves up for success? Because I know we were just talking about this as well. Really, regardless of what type of passage it is, what section it's falling under, whether it's an experimental passage or a content passage, or if it's a chem phys or a psych soc or biochem or even cars, pretty much the same general approach is going to work, right? Like the same general framework. And it's really got 3 or maybe we'll say 4 or 5 steps, right? We're going to read the question and make sure we understand the question. We're going to figure out where the information that we need should come from, passage, content, right? If it's a cars passage, maybe we're thinking where, things like that. What do I need, right? And how can I take action on that? What am I trying to find in the answers, either good or bad? Like, what's my criteria, right? I'm going to go through and evaluate and eliminate, be very systematic there. And then troubleshooting. And that's kind of like the unseen fifth step, right? If I get stuck, how do I move forward? So this is what we're about to get into.
Yeah, we're about to go through it. That was like the great overview. So if you're like, oh my gosh, Molly, slow down. Like,
we're expanding.
We're expanding. Like, oh my gosh, Molly, slow down. I'm writing this all out. Don't worry. We'll actually go through every step much more slowly. But I love, like, okay, that's the overarching. Let's dive into every single step. So let's talk about the very first step with every single question, which is the read and rephrase step. I love this step because, like you were saying before, and I'm in 100% agreement, most important step, most skipped step. I have been with students who I've worked with for a while, and I'm like, okay, let's go through this question together using your strategy. And they're like, great. They read out the question and they go straight to the answer options. And I'm like, what have we been doing this whole time? Like, oh my goodness, what have we been doing this whole time? So, because I could, especially those students who are a habit of that, when we review their exams, when we read their questions, notice what I see all the time in the review. Oh, misunderstood the question. Oh, missed the word in the question. Oh, forgot to rephrase. Well, yeah, because you're not practicing it. So the most important step, reading the question, but a great way to ensure that you're actually comprehending the question is try putting in your own words. Try rephrasing the question in a way that your friend would be able to understand. Don't leave all these complicated words in there. Try to simplify, because a lot of times we get distracted by all these like huge words. I mean, we'll go through an example question later on where we can talk about like how to rephrase these questions, but just try to make it simple as you can. It doesn't have to be a wildly different rephrase, but just try to make the question a little bit more simple. Yes, if it takes you 10, 15 seconds, take the time to do that, because The result of that is you now understand the question. If you can put it simply, you understand it. And now this question now has become, and this is not exaggeration, 100% easier on you because you've actually rephrased it.
I agree,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes the questions get really complicated, right? They're really convoluted, especially like think of a double negative question,
Mhm.
right? Like what does not represent something that's least effective? Like what?
Yeah.
Excuse me? Like
Mhm.
what am I looking for?
Mhm.
What does not represent something that's least effective? So like
I'm confused.
what? Yeah,
Right.
like, okay, what is not the least effective? What is more effective then? Or
Right.
like your best answer might be something that's the most effective.
Right.
Because if it's not the least,
It must
something
be.
that's the most is obviously not the least, right? Like what does that mean? That question just hurts my brain. Or
Mhm.
maybe you get information that's brand new in the passage or in the question.
Mhm.
What does that information mean to you? Right?
Mhm.
Like does that relate to the passage? What is going on here? I have all this information.
Mhm.
Do I understand it? Do I
Mhm.
know enough about what's going on in the question to figure out, do I need
Mhm.
passage info or do I need content? Right? Like
Mhm.
you have to figure out enough to determine where you need the information to come from.
Mhm.
And that's something that a lot of people miss out on. And I feel like the word choice that is very common, which is read and rephrase, almost does a disservice,
Mm.
even though it's the most common way to phrase it, because the word rephrase.
Mm.
A lot of students think rephrase and they think, let me shuffle the words around
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
that'll be a rephrase.
Mhm.
No, right?
Mhm.
Read and simplify,
Sure. I like that.
right? Read and summarize, read
Mhm.
and evaluate,
Mhm.
right? Because if it's a really complicated question,
Mhm.
you need to be able to start simplifying it,
Mhm.
especially when the wording gets really convoluted, which we've got a couple examples here.
Mhm.
But I think it'd be probably makes sense to first talk about how to determine if something's passage or content based, which
Right.
once we know what the question itself on paper is asking,
Mhm.
we're gonna realize, okay, well, I don't have all the information in my head. Okay, I might
Mhm.
see particular buzzwords or reminders, anchors from the passage.
Mhm.
Does this remind me of the passage? Yes. Where?
Mhm.
What am I going to use? What information
Mhm.
do I have at my disposal to help me simplify this question and determine what my answers might look like?
Mhm.
Um, if there's nothing from the passage, like we said, that's always your first place that you're looking. Okay, what do I know about this topic? Um, so passage based is first. Do you have any buzzwords, any information, any units, any clue of how it relates to the passage? It has to relate somehow. There might be a question, and this is one from AMC material I remember. It's like, which of the following is a function of the organ in the passage? There's only one organ in the passage. Once you know that organ was the liver, this is a content question. What is the function of the liver? They didn't talk about the liver in depth. They literally just said the word liver. That is a content-based question, but you need one word from the passage, right? There
Mhm.
are also questions like, which of the following is true of a figure? Content's not going to help you there. That's
Absolutely not.
entirely passage-based.
Mhm.
They may have questions that are pretty evenly mixed 50-50, right? Like, if we were talking about a sequence of, maybe we had 4 different peptides, or we had a protein product of a gene that was mutated in different ways to change its amino acid sequence. Maybe we asked about which amino acid or which mutant protein would remain the longest in a cation exchange column. It's like, okay, we need the understanding of the proteins and the mutations and the details of the passage, but we also need to know about what a cation exchange column is, right? It's
Mhm.
like, okay, that one's about 50-50. You have to make that decision. How much
Mhm.
do I have in the passage, and what from my knowledge do I need to fill in those blanks?
Right, right. And I think this step number two is so critical to actually explicitly do. Because someone might be listening to this and be like, oh, that's so obvious. Like I need to either choose whether it's content or passage. But a lot of times we miss actually explicitly saying, is this a content-based question or is this something I need the actual passage for? Where a lot of times I've seen this where a student maybe intuitively knows that, but then because they didn't explicitly state it, they're so like disjointed when going through the question. They're like wandering through the passage, kind of like guessing at the con. They have not because they haven't identified it. They're so inefficient when going through the question, right? They read the question, they understand, they've simplified it, but because they didn't actually say where they're getting their information from, they're just kind of meandering through it. I kind of like relate it to, if you go to the grocery store, like without a grocery
Mhm.
list, right? It's kind of,
Oh
you kind of like,
gosh.
yeah, you're like just like wandering around the grocery store, just kind of like, oh,
Oh
okay,
my
yeah,
God.
that looks nice. Yeah, that looks nice too. But
I'm banned
imagine,
from doing that.
right? Yeah, you're like absolutely right. Because then you come home with like all the stuff you don't need, right? But if you explicitly say, these are the things that I'm looking for, this is where you need to go, you are so much more efficient. You know exactly where you need to go. And this is where I think step number two really shines. Explicitly
Mhm.
say, hey, do I need the passage for this, or is this a content question? If you say it's a passage-based question, go back. Go back and look, target. Okay, where then? Because you've explicitly stated it, that automatically cues in your mind, well, if it's from the passage, where in the passage was it? You don't start
Mhm.
wandering away, you start getting targeted. But if we don't make that explicit statement, we start just meandering through. We start maybe relying on content just as a preset, and then we get super stressed, like, oh my gosh, I don't know from the content. Then we just start stress reading the passage. Right? All these
Mhm.
things happen when we don't make the statement. We've seen this so many times. But this also calls back to why you need a good understanding of the passage first. Because if you
Mhm.
don't know what's in the passage, can you actually say what this is a content or passage-based question?
No. And that's
Absolutely
the
not.
problem.
Right? That's the problem. Where so many people just don't read the passage properly or skim through the passage and they expect to know exactly where to find the information for every single question. Absolutely
Mhm.
not. Absolutely
Mhm.
not. And so this step number two is why the first step before we even do the questions is to properly read the passage. We never recommend just skip the passage entirely.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot, especially in our original episodes, OG Mike and Molly from like January
Sure.
2025. Go back, check it out if you want. We talked a lot about review. We actually did a 3 episode series on how to review.
Mhm.
I think the review aspect is really valuable with step two, which is again
Mhm.
trying to see is this passage based or content based. Sometimes in the moment, if you're doing timed practice, maybe you're low on time, maybe you're really stressed, maybe you're really tired, maybe you make a mistake.
Mhm.
When you review, okay, you read the question, and then when you're evaluating, is this passage or content based, go back over. I want you to really go through the passage with fine tooth comb. What was the clue that they could ask this question? Okay, you
Mhm.
might not have time to go back through the passage with the fine tooth comb, 230 times on your test. You're not going to do that in a timed situation. But when you review, especially for
Mhm.
questions you flagged or you missed,
Mhm.
make sure you scan that passage from top to bottom. Is there anything that I could have used? Any
Mhm.
clue that the passage gave me that could have helped me eliminate either the answer I chose or an answer that tempted me, right? If not, okay, what was the content thing that I needed, right? But
Mhm.
again, default to passage whenever you can. You might have assumed something was content because you didn't remember anything under timed conditions from the passage, but during that review, you need to go back and look. Really go in and scan. And if there was something that was in the passage that you could have used that would have helped you pick the right answer, why didn't that jump out at you the first time you read it? How could we learn from that? And again, our science passage and question strategies are so intertwined. And this applies to cars too, but how could I have read the passage differently so that I would have picked up on that clue and I then would have gotten this question right? So they're so intertwined. And again, check out our episodes on review if you want, but I think this is one step in particular you really want to expand on in your review if you struggled with a particular question.
100%. So step number one, read and simplify. Step number two, content passage. But now, okay, we understand the question. We now know where we need to go. I think there's a kind of a step number 2.5. Go back to that place. Actually, a lot of people say like, oh, it's a passage-based question, 100%. And then they just look at the answer options. And I'm like,
Yeah, but like, what
what what,
support?
what was that about? No, go back and get like a. I like to think like, and I think you also use this word, which is great because we didn't talk about this word before. But when you started using it, I'm like, oh, I use the same word. Anchor your idea to something,
Mhm.
right? It's the idea of anchoring where you've classified as passage or you classify as content. Anchor your idea to something. Or it's like, okay,
Yeah,
you said it was
where?
passage. What in the passage are you anchoring it to? Was it the
Mhm.
figure that they said? Was it a relationship before the figure? Don't just say passage and then move on. Actually
Yeah.
say, where in the passage am I anchoring my idea? Am I pulling information from? Sometimes it might just be a kind of question where it's like, oh, which of the following is supported in the passage or something like that. or which of the following is a conclusion that we can make from the passage. Maybe you're not able to anchor it specifically for those kinds of questions. Okay, fine. Maybe you're not going to anchor it right away. But a lot of the times they will say, oh, based on the figure, right? What can we conclude? Okay, well, go back and look at the figure. Prime your mind. Remind yourself, okay, what did they do in the figure? Or they ask a question like, oh, which of the following is a likely function of XRP1? Go back and look at XRP1. Like, what is the function of that thing before you even look at answer options? Like,
Yeah.
actually anchor your idea to something before you just look at answers and start just meandering through them.
Yes, for sure. Because ultimately, that is so critical for step 3, right? We've understood the question. We've decided whether it was content or passage based. We've then gone back and refreshed ourselves. We've dredged it out of our memory, or we've found the part of the passage that was relevant. Step 3 is to try and anticipate, right? And I want to be really careful with the word anticipate, because some students hear that and say, I should know the right answer. I should guess at the right answer and then look. And sometimes you see an answer that's it has a lot of good parts, right? Some students, though, take anticipate to mean guess at what the right answer is. And then if something has some of the right parts, that must be it. Confidently move on. That's not it. When I think anticipate, what I think is figure out what kind of criteria am I going to use to evaluate my answers? Like, what is the topic, right? The general topic, what are some buzzwords I might see? Those buzzwords, if an answer choice has it, I want to focus more on those than ones that don't, because it's more relevant to what I had broken down already. Okay, so you're trying to figure out, like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. This is an idea that I have. If anything matches that or comes close to it, then go through that answer choice with the fine-tooth comb. Is this actually correct? Okay, so just be careful. We want to anticipate, we want to process and kind of put it all together. I have my rephrase and I have the content. What am I now gonna do? Right. And again, to bring back a question before, if it was, what is the function of the organ in the passage? Pretty straightforward question to rephrase, right? What does the organ do? You go to the passage, you know it's the organ from the passage. You go back, it says the liver, right? Okay, well, what do I know about the functions of the liver? Okay, detoxifies drugs. It's important with, fats. It's blah, blah, blah. Like, you can kind of run through it. Okay, now I go through and I see some stuff. This works, great, right? If it was the more complicated example, like the which amino acid has the longest retention time in a cation exchange column. Okay, we're talking about amino acids. I want to figure out longest retention time means you're going to get stuck in that column for longer, right? Okay, and it's a cation exchange column. I need content for that. I know a cation exchange column from my material is going to be something
content-based, right?
Which is content-based, right? I'm not just going to say content and move on. No, I'm going to make sure, okay, well, what do I know about cation exchange columns? I know that they're named for what they attract. So we have a negatively charged column that's attracting positively charged things. Okay, now I have which amino acid will stay the longest in a column that attracts positively charged things, right? It's like, okay, put it all together now, right? What amino acid is the most positively charged?
Right.
That's your anticipation, right? That's what it means. You just fully simplify. You take the question rephrase and the simplification, and you take the material from the passage or from your content knowledge that was relevant. You put it together, and now you know exactly what you're looking for, right? I don't know, just with a list of 4 options, which amino acid has the longest retention time in a cation exchange column. But now that I've processed it, right, I would have a much higher accuracy on which amino acid is positively charged, right? Put in the work to understand it and simplify it before you stress yourself out looking at 4 answer choices. That's my advice.
Yeah. And what you've just done now is do all the first 3 steps essentially instinctually. And that's always the goal when it comes to strategy. When you first start implementing the strategy, it's going to feel so weird. It's going to be like, okay, wait, I've done my read and rephrase. Okay, now I have to do content passage. We want to get to a point where, yes, at first it will feel weird. It will feel strange. Maybe if you're not used to, if you've especially built up certain habits over a period of time, it's going to be hard to get used to it. But we always want to get to a point where there's no other way to do a question, where you go from like the way Molly just did it wonderfully, where you read and simplify, then you anchored your idea to your content. You said content, but then you didn't just say content. You actually anchored it to a content piece, right? You were doing all the pieces there. Oh, okay, so cation exchange. Okay, what do I know about that? Oh, and then you put it together. Now I can anticipate. Oh, I'm looking for something really positively charged. And then you can look, or maybe really not negative charge, or whatever the answer option
Yeah.
might say. And then you can, because you've now anticipated what you're going to see, now you can actually look at your answer options with kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe like with a scalpel, where you can actually now actually assess and eliminate based on this anticipation because you did the work.
Yeah. I feel like it's important to recognize that in order to get the correct answer, you have to do all these things anyways.
Mm-hmm.
The most common mistake that we see, or again, mistake sounds like you know the better thing and you still do it wrong. Like the most common instinct that people have is just to get through the question, get to the answers, but you still have to process the question. The difference between what we're talking about and what many of us are probably doing in this moment is we're expecting ourselves to do all of this processing as we have two answer choices that we're trying to debate between. And think of how much harder that is, right?
Harder.
Even, last episode we talked about working in memory, or memory and encoding. We talked about working memory, right? Like how it is very difficult to hold a large volume of information and manipulate it in your head at once, right? It's that 7 plus and minus 2 rule. Like you can't really hold that much information in your working memory and manipulate it and evaluate it and think very deeply about it. If you process and I always use the word digest, which is weird. If you digest the question and then you get to the answers, you have a lot of, mental clarity, right? You don't have that many open tabs in your brain. If you don't, and you skim through the question, and then you now have two answer choices that you're thinking about, and you don't know, and then you have to go back to the question, you now have such a huge cognitive load. You have so many things you're trying to keep track of in your brain at the same time, and it's going to take a really long time, and you're probably going to fall for a lot of the traps that the AMC is setting for you, right? Travel light. If something doesn't make sense, don't let it take up a lot of mental space. Process it, package it up, move on. Okay? That's basically what we're telling you to do.
Yeah, and that also speaks to a point of, when we're going through them, make sure to finish before moving on. Don't read and rephrase like, okay, I did my rephrase and moved on. Now let me say it's content passage without actually rephrasing. That's why we do it in these steps, to say, okay, finish with step number 1 before you go to step number 2, because a lot of mistakes that people make come from, they say, I read it and rephrased, or I read and simplified, but they didn't actually simplify the question. So step 2 became so much more difficult because they didn't actually understand what the question was asking. So if you don't understand the question, you have no idea where to go. And they're like, but Mike, I can't do I can't say it's content passage. I just had no idea. It's like, well, did you simplify the question? Right?
Yeah.
And then, well, we did.
Steps.
Well, then it was obviously the passage. Well, of course. Go through these steps. There's a reason step number 1 is to read and simplify. A lot of people try to switch it around. They try to read it, then classify the question, then simplify. It's like, wait, no. Actually simplify it first, and then you can classify the question. Right? And there's a very good reason for that. I also like to make a point about the anticipate step, where you're kind of putting everything together and about to recognize what you're about to see. Sometimes the anticipate step's a little bit hard, where it's like a lot of times you don't know. Like for a question that's like, what can you conclude from the figure? Right. Well, it's like, okay, well, there's maybe a few things I can conclude from the figure. Well, I know the figure had to do with like maybe enzyme concentration and rate. Okay, there's a few things I can say there. The anticipate step isn't supposed to be a 20-second step. In my mind, the anticipate step is kind of like the, again, I'm going to call back to our passage strategy episode from like 2 episodes ago, where it's kind of like the trends step of taught, or it's kind of like
interpretation.
Yeah, right, of data interpretation, where anticipate should take like 5 seconds. Like try to anticipate it quickly, right? Like put it together. Okay, what am I looking for? If you can't anticipate what you're looking for, that's totally okay, right? You've done, at least you made the intention to try to. Like with taught, you're still trying to look for the trend in TAUT. Again, I'm really calling back to the last episode, so if you haven't, go check it out. Where it's like, yes, you go through title, you look at your axes, look at your units, then, okay, take a look at your trends. If there's one that you can pick out, great, pick that trend. Same way, but if you can't, don't try to stare at the data for like 20 minutes trying to figure out what's going on. Just move on. Where in the same way in the question strategy, you read and rephrase the question or simplify the question, right? You now classify where am I getting my question from? You anchor your idea to something and try to anticipate what you're about to see. Sometimes you can't, totally okay. 5 seconds, if you can, great. If you can't, now you can move on. But at least you made the attempt to anticipate. Right. A lot of times I see students just kind of sit there and look at the question like, okay, what am I about to see? What am I about to see? And I'm like, okay, go look at the answer options. You've tried. Okay, you couldn't. Now look at the answer options. But they just sit there for so long. I'm like, okay, please don't make that mistake. We're just sitting there staring at the question, trying to figure out, okay, what's my answer?
Yeah. I feel like it's so silly, and it's also very counterintuitive. I think the MCAT is a lot more forgiving than most students think it is. Like, I think a lot of students are like, I need to know everything from the bottom of my heart. I need to be able to explain everything. Again, like a professor in office hours. If I don't understand a figure, I need to. If I don't understand what I'm expecting for the answers, I need to do that before I move on. There are certain parts of this where, as long as you do the legwork, again, like, and to talk about the TOT strategy, which is for breaking down figures from the couple episodes ago, as long as you look at the title, as you know, you read it, as long as you look at the axes and the units they have, that's your like requirement. Okay. If the trend's not immediately available, that's okay. Keep moving. You will have answer choices to look through, right? If you get a question on that figure, it's the same deal here. As long as you rephrase, as long as you make a decision, content versus passage, and as long as you pick whatever you want to use, as you're fusing that, if it's really hard to anticipate, okay, well, you've done all the legwork. Okay, now you can lean on reasoning with the 4 answers, and that's okay, right? You don't have to be perfect. But make sure you're doing those earlier steps, because there are, the trends, answer choices can save you, right? But if you don't understand the question, answer choices are just going to make this harder. Okay, so
Absolutely.
the anticipation step is great if you can do it. If you can't, that's fine, because of our step 4. Okay.
Because of step 4.
Step 4 is elimination. Okay. And I think for me, when I've taught those FTS or the free trial sessions, right, the sessions that we teach for the public, and I'm teaching science passage strategy, if I ask, what's your strategy for science questions? I either get crickets, no one says anything, or process of elimination. I think a lot of us intuitively know, okay, I'm supposed to eliminate. Very few actually do, right? But again, we're not looking for a good answer. We're looking for 3 wrong answers, or we're looking to find and identify and select the least wrong answer. Okay, very different mindset. One that you maybe know and have heard about, but you need to get practice with. I want to see something that's straight up wrong. It contradicts what I read, right? If I'm looking for a positively charged amino acid, maybe it's actually, that's a bad example. If something was negative, okay, it's clearly not that, right? Like it's objectively not the same as what I'm looking for. It's the opposite, or it's indirect conflict. Okay, it could just be super random. And this is the one that students struggle with probably the most. Some of them, if it's that random, you know it when you see it. We're doing a passage about light, and suddenly we're talking about flamingo. Actually, flamingos, you could find
There's
a
some
link there
pink
because of the
there,
color.
like the color,
We're talking
wavelength.
about,
See, no, this is the mindset that a lot of people are going with, like, oh my gosh, but maybe this thing. Right?
yeah. Does it feel random?
Mhm.
Can there be a connection? Is the question identifying some connection between this thing and the passage? Is there any connection? Yes or no? And sometimes there's not, right? Or maybe it's a figure question, right? Which of the following is true of the figure? And there's an answer choice that's talking about something that just wasn't studied, right? This is not part of the study. We didn't look at the molecular weight of this protein. We just shot light at it and saw how the activity changed. Like, I wasn't studying the molecular weight and the impact of mutation. I never mutated it. That can't be right, because I didn't do that, right? It wasn't relevant. Something like that would be a good example of how to eliminate for being random or just not related, not mentioned.
And I think I always love I love our car strategies so much. I actually use a lot of car strategies when it comes, like, we've already used a lot of cars mindset when it comes to science strategies so far. And
Similar,
it's very, because I mean a lot of the same
especially
basic
questions.
concepts when it comes to questions. And one I really like relying on comes with making answer options do battle. And here's why. Because a lot of the times, answer option, like a lot of times for these questions, we look at all 4 answer options and we get immediately overwhelmed. We're like, I have 4 answer options, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like, I don't know where to think, I don't know where to go. I don't know. Maybe we need to do our earlier steps, but maybe you even did those first 3 steps, and now you're looking at all 4 answer options. A lot of the
That's too many.
times, it's too many. Like, don't look at all 4 answer options at once. I always recommend look at 2 at a time. Because people either do one of these 2 things. They either look at all 4 at once, or they look at it 1 at a time.
Yeah.
And I don't recommend either. And here's why. Looking at all 4 at once, super overwhelming. I'm like, what am I even supposed to focus on? How am I supposed to think? There's this and this. We're taking too much at once. But the problem with looking at 1 at a time is, if anyone's kind of done this, maybe you can relate because I did this, where it's like I would look I would look at A, and I'm like, all right, look at A, I'm like, oh, don't like it, eliminate.
Terrible.
Great. I look at B, and I'm like, don't like it, eliminate. Great. I look at C, I don't like it. Great. Eliminate. Great. And then I look at D, and I'm like, oh, I also don't like D. I'm like,
This
oh,
is
D,
the worst of the
this is
4.
the worst of the 4. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I just eliminated all 4 answer options. Now I've got to go back. Now I'm stressed. Now I'm stressed for time. I'm like, there's so much going on in my mind. Now I'm just like panicking. I'm going to pick one and just move on. Right? We don't want to get there. So, and when we talk about elimination, I usually never recommend to eliminate anything on its own. Never eliminate anything on its own.
Never.
I always like to compare answer options, right? If I don't like A, and this, again, this is super card strategy, but I love implementing it when it comes to like the sciences as well.
It's
I look
relevant.
at A,
Yeah.
and because it's so relevant, if I look at A and I don't like it, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to compare it to B, because now A, objectively eliminating an answer on its own is actually really hard, really stressful. That's when we start overthinking so much. But when we compare it to something else, even though we might not like either, there's usually one that we don't like more. There's usually one that was like, okay, I can see that that one's more wrong. So now that I'm comparing to someone else, I'm able to be a little bit more certain in my elimination. That I'm like, oh well, I know I may not like A, but I know it's worse than B at least, right? Oh, and then I compare B and C. Well, I might not like C. I might not like both. I might not like B, but I know C has to be wrong. Okay, so comparing the 2, I'm eliminating C. Okay, now B and D. Oh, well, D was the worst of the 4. Well, so I know it's worse than B. Even if I don't like B, D's worse. Where this helps you get those questions right that most people get wrong, right? Really, truly does. But if we don't compare, it's so hard to get the right answer. Truly. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of comparison.
Me too. And it's so funny because I've done, if anyone watches the AMC video solutions that we do for all of their resources, both Mike and I do a lot of the passage and question breakdowns as part of that. And it's so hard sometimes, you know, whether it's cars or it's science, you read, and when you truly understand the question, sometimes you see A and you're like, this is terrible. Like this, there's
Awful.
no way that there could be an answer worse than this. It's objectively so wrong, it's almost laughable. Even in those cases, and I kind of have to grit my teeth, I'm gonna leave it as an option until I look at B. Of course, the second I'm done with B, yeah, no, A is worse. But even then, even when you fully process the question, you see an answer and you're like, there's no planet that this could be correct for this passage in this question. Even then, hold off. I know for myself, when I was studying for the test, and this, of course, has been years, but I remember so distinctly how often I would do that. Like how often I would get to the 4th and then say, this one stinks too, and then have to restart. And now you have to go back through 4 again, right? I'm a big fan of dealing with that decision making or dealing with the tough thing in the moment. Don't stew on it. Don't kick the, can down the road or whatever the saying is, right? Like, I've got a tough decision, make it, right? Is this question content or passage? I don't know. It's not going to make more sense later. Decide what you're going to use. A or B, I don't know. They're both good. Which one's worse? Reread the question. Make your decision now. Don't wait until you see C, because now you have 3 things to decide between. You're going to have to pick between A and B at some point. Make your decision now.
Do it now.
Don't delay. It's going to make it even more stressful. Do it now, right? Especially in a test like the MCAT that's so time-based. You don't have the luxury of, having 4 options to compare at once. Make your decision. Make sure you make an informed decision. And if you struggle, please flag the question so that you could go back over it later. But, you have to be able to move not fast, but
But efficiently, I
efficiently.
think. Yeah, that's the word. I love how we wrote that, like
I know.
efficiently. And there was something I kind of really want to touch on because there was something that you said that I loved. I love that I can't move on without hitting on. It's the idea that even though you wanted to eliminate A, you know it's wrong. Every bone in your body said it was wrong. You still didn't eliminate. Because I think this really
Mhm.
speaks to one of the kind of real keys to success when it comes to the MCAT, which is consistency. It's
Yeah.
always consistency. A lot of people know strategy. I see this all the time, students in the course and even in tutoring, where they know the strategy. We teach the strategy, but they allow themselves to take shortcuts. They allow themselves to say, you know what,
Mhm.
this time I'm going to eliminate. A is so wrong, I'm just going to eliminate, then compare B and C, then whatever. Right? They allow themselves to not follow strategy. But the problem with if you allow yourself to do that, that means now you have to, there's so much more brain power now. Like, oh, am I going to follow strategy? Am I going to not? And you're more likely, if you give yourself those like kind of outs, right? You're more likely to fall into the traps. Where
Mhm.
I am a huge, huge proponent of consistency. I don't care if you think if A legitimately says I am the wrong answer. I do not care. You still compare and
Mhm.
eliminate because I cannot tell you. I cannot. It's unbelievable. I cannot tell you how many questions I've seen students do and get them wrong because oh they eliminated something in isolation, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
many. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, and I asked them, okay, why didn't you compare and eliminate? Because they said, oh, I was so certain it was wrong. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, that was, if you had just compared, you would have gotten this right.
I feel like the fact that making many decisions
Mhm.
takes up more headspace and makes you more exhausted than making fewer decisions and relying on strategy or relying on habits is so undervalued, right? But
Mhm.
we understand it in some parts of our life. Like think about um sleep, right? If every night you have to think, okay, well, what do I have going on tomorrow? How important is it that I get my rest? You know, like what is my earliest thing? What time is it right now? Like you have to think every single night, do this internal debate of when should I wake up? When should I go to sleep? I don't know. I don't know. It takes a lot of time, and then maybe if you make the wrong decision, right, your body's never getting used to it, this one wake up time, this one sleep time. It's going to take a lot of mental load, and you're going to have times where it works for you and you feel great, and you're going to have times that it doesn't work for you and you feel
Mhm.
awful, right?
Mhm.
There's so little consistency in your results because you have very little consistency in your system,
Mm.
right? And so the same deal applies, right? If you were to say, you know, I care about my sleep, I value my sleep, I have a goal of getting better sleep and feeling more rested, I'm going to set a wake up time that's consistent. Now I don't have to wonder when should I wake up. Maybe I still for now have to wonder when to go to sleep, but I'm at least going to make a habit of I'm going to wake up at this time, right? Other habits start to fall into place once you make one decision, right? And doing it consistently, you're going to achieve those same results all the time, right? Consistency in your system and your approach gives you consistency in your results. And that's one of the things that I talk about, especially in general office hours or in tutoring, when students are like, I'm, I got a 512 and then I got a 504 and then I got a 506 and then I got a 510 and then I got a 502. It's like, whoa, we're riding a roller coaster here. What is your study strategy? What are we doing in our full lengths? And it's sometimes I take breaks halfway through. Sometimes I have caffeine. Sometimes I do this. Sometimes I do this. It's like, whoa. You will
Mhm.
never have a score that's consistent if you do something different every single time, right? Of course, in this episode, we're talking about questions, but the same idea applies. I feel like sometimes it's easier to think of justifications for that in every other context to prove that if you approach questions in a consistent way, your accuracy is going to go up consistently.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's well, when we talk about it now, it seems so like obvious. Like, yeah, if you do the same thing, you will get the same result. But every single time I like work with a student or like talk with a student, I'm like, oh, you're fluctuating all these places. Why is it sometimes we're doing well, sometimes we're doing not? Like I cannot like 90 I can't actually even think of a time where this wasn't the case. Every single time we had a student with a fluctuating score, it's because their strategy fluctuated. It's because they did
Inconsistent.
not have a consistent progress process. And so we're talking about science now, but also applies in cars. But I'll focus on science today. When it comes to your question strategy, have a consistent strategy. Your score is fluctuating because how you go through the questions is fluctuating. Consistency breeds consistency. So please go through the questions the same way every time and you will get the same results.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And I feel like, we've gone through every layer of this question strategy. We've established a system that trusts us. We've seen it work thousands
It's
and
simple.
thousands
It's
of times,
simple, right?
right?
It's
It led
simple.
us, yeah. I mean, it led us both to achieving top scores, but also we've seen it work for so many students of very different backgrounds as well, right? Having consistency and being consistent in the healthy habits is the best possible situation. So again, to recap, you're going to read the question and actually try and understand it, right? You're going to simplify the question itself as much as you can, and then you're going to ask yourself, what information should I use? Okay? If it's from the passage, where in the passage? If it's from your content, okay, what's the fact or the topic that I need to analyze in order to perform well on this question? We're going to try to anticipate, kind of taking that rephrase and taking the information we've identified as relevant and combining them to figure out, like, how should I be approaching these questions? How can I debate whether one question is better than the other, right? And then we're going to eliminate. And again, it could be contradictory to the passage. It could be just so beyond what the passage is talking about. It feels incredibly random. It could be, if we're talking a math question, maybe it doesn't have the right unit, right? Maybe it's relevant to the passage, but it just doesn't answer the question itself. Maybe you have two answers that say the exact same thing. You can't have two answers that are right. Maybe you eliminate them both. There are lots of reasons to eliminate. We go through all of those in depth in courses and things like that, and even in our solution videos. There are lots, right? But we're looking for what's wrong. That's our
Always.
consistent strategy. Now, there are times where we do all of the best things and we still struggle, right? If you're really low on time or really low on brain power, sometimes we have to do the best that we can. Okay. I wouldn't recommend, some students are like, oh, if I'm low on time, I'll just go straight to the answers. No, still do your rephrase, still try and see, right? Is this content, is this passage, whatever, but you have to make quicker decisions between the two. And if you're really, really struggling with the question, especially if it's a question that your history has shown you struggle with, especially things like calculations or data interpretation, if you know from the beginning, from your review of other passages and exams, that you struggle a lot with calculations and data interpretation, maybe this question is not one I should really fixate on. If I've got 10 questions to do, let's assume they're all discrete. I have 10 discrete questions and I have 4 minutes. Maybe I guess, or I do some pretty basic calculations for this one, and then I go off and I have way more time for the rest. Prioritize, but any question that you don't know, right? Any question you don't answer confidently, you flag. Okay. So that even if you get it right, you make sure that you'll go back and you'll review it and you'll figure out how to get it right the next time.
Right. And I think that idea of flagging is an option that everybody knows of. Like everyone knows, oh, flagging is an option, but one that I don't even think people realize is such an important tool in your toolkit. Where if you're struggling with timing, an idea I always want you to consider is that say you're doing a science section that's 59 questions, right? Every question is worth the same amount. They're all worth 1 point. Not all of them are the same difficulty, right? So, and a lot of the times when you review, go back and review your passages and and you'll realize the questions that you spent the most time on were usually the ones you got wrong. But then you didn't get to do the really easy questions at the very end of the exam because you were so stuck on this one question, it actually tanked your score and you still got it wrong. And so when you are going through your passages, a great strategy that again Molly hit on, and I really want to drill in, is use your flagging tool. Use your flagging where it's like, yes, you read and simplified. You said it was content or passage. You've done your best to anticipate, and you're now trying to eliminate. Maybe you got stuck between two, and you're like, oh, I don't know which to choose. Or maybe it's a calculation one that you historically don't like to do. Flag it and move on. Choose an answer, first and foremost. Never, ever, ever leave an answer option blank, by all means. Flag it and move on though, because I want you to get to the end of the exam. get to the end of
Mhm.
the exam. Where now, because here are the two answer options, because I hear this all the time, where they're like, okay, but Mike, what if I don't have a chance to go back? Right? Where I flag it and I'm like, well, okay, so if you didn't have a chance to go back, that means you didn't have the time in the first place to do it. Right? That means you,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the kind of the idea where it's like, yes, okay, I think that's actually a good thing. If you didn't have a chance to go back, I'm so happy that you didn't waste your time on this then. Right?
On that particular question that you already knew was
Mhm.
really hard for you.
Mhm.
I feel like it's an idea that we encounter in medicine a lot, especially in emergency medicine, where
Mhm.
you have to do the most good that you can for the greatest number of people with the resources that you have, right? If you have 10 people involved in a motor vehicle accident and you have to, as a singular provider with, one tiny little pack of supplies, you have to treat all 10 patients. You're going to want to prioritize the patients that you can have the greatest impact on, right? You want to max out the amount of people that you can help, right? You do not have unlimited time and resources for this test. You need to give yourself the opportunity to get as many questions correct as possible. Sometimes there's a question that even if you had 10 minutes to do this question, you'd still get wrong.
Mhm.
That's not the one to focus on, because that means you're getting all of these other questions wrong, right? You're trying to be a hero and you're so locked onto this one question that you end up not even attempting 5 other questions, right? You
Mhm.
have to do the greatest amount of good that you can with the amount of time that you're given. And that's going to come down to being realistic with yourself. It's going to become from being intentional in your review. There's that word again. And making sure you understand where your struggle or weak points are. Again, calculations and data interpretation are probably the two most common. Sometimes it's also different content areas that we're struggling with, but be realistic. And if you know historically you have a very low accuracy on a particular type of question and you are low on time, you do your best. Maybe give yourself half as much time as you'd give a normal average question. Still read the question, still, take a stab at it and an educated guess, but make a decision in that moment. I'm not going to let this question eat up the time that I need for the others. Flag it, do your best, guess, and then move on, right?
Mhm.
And then make sure to come back and review that later. Um,
Right.
and I feel like in that same vein, right, when we think of the questions that are the most common, again, data interpretation, we talked about. Go back and watch our science passage lesson because we've talked about data interpretation. Again, we mentioned it today as well, title, axes, units, trends. But we go into a lot more detail there. What we haven't yet talked about is MCAT math. And
Mhm.
it kind of relates to a lot of the things that we're talking about in this episode on making sure you simplify as much as you possibly can before starting the complex debate between answer choices. It's kind of
Mhm.
a similar vein for MCAT math. Make things as simple as physically possible in terms of your calculations before you expect yourself to calculate an answer.
Right. And
So,
I think, and I mean, we both do like the free trial sessions. Probably the MCAT math session
the most
is
popular.
probably our most popular one, where people I will like, I'll do the MCAT math session, and then I do another session. They're like, when's the next time you're doing MCAT math?
I
It's like
know.
somebody told me about it. I need to join the MCAT math session. And so I think this is something, because I think this is a real pain point for a lot of people, where
Yes.
math can be such a struggle on this exam. But the only reason it's a struggle for a lot of people, and again, I'm really generalizing here, it's because we try to tackle it the way we tackled math before, right? Where we use the
Mhm.
same strategies that we did in undergrad and high school. But in those places, we had things like a calculator, right? Where on
Mhm.
this exam, we don't have a calculator. So if we don't have the same tools, we can't use the same methods for tackling math questions. So we
Mhm.
need new methods, new tools. But it's when you really recognize the tools that we have at our disposal when doing MCAT math a lot of times becomes so much more straightforward.
It's so
Like,
fun.
it's like
It's my
so
favorite session to teach. I love
right.
it.
Because like it really just turns kind of into a little bit like a puzzle where it's like, I know they don't expect me to do some crazy math here. They really don't. Like you might think they do, they never do. Right? Because they know you don't have a calculator. So they know
Mhm.
there's always some way for you to do the problem without the calculator. And I think it's kind of fun. It's like, okay, what is the way here? But there are
Right.
tools like that we can use that we'll talk about in the next episode with haha,
Mhm.
next episode is MCAT math. Where once you know, like a lot of times just knowing what the tools are, once you know what they are, like MCAT math comes so much easier. Like I know people come like after we teach them the strategies, they're like, Mike, I've been using the strategies and it's like
Yeah.
shocking how much easier math becomes because you don't have to take you realize there's a lot of stuff you really don't have to care about sometimes. So I'm really excited to talk about it because I think everyone listening is gonna be in for a real treat.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to talk about with students, especially because so many struggle with MCAT math. But most often it's not because they don't know how to do math. Most often the math boils down to addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You got to understand how to do scientific notation too. That's pretty much it, right?
Those are the 5 fundamental skills that I think I think people underestimate the skills that they have when it comes to those 5, where it's like, oh, I don't know how to do them. Like, no, you do, but you're just trying to do it in a way that's so inefficient that even I wouldn't be able to do.
They're trying to do every step. And again, we're going to talk about this in depth, but we don't have the same tools that you had in undergrad, but you also don't have the same expectations. You don't have to show your work. You don't have to calculate with X amount of significant figures.
Sig figures
Round.
drove
Your
me
job is to pick
crazy.
the closest out of 4 options. Round to your heart's content, as long as it's reasonable for you to do so.
Right, heart's content's a little bit dangerous because I'm like, oh.
Intentional rounding. We'll talk about this. We're getting ahead of ourselves because we both love it so much. We will end it here. We'll save it for the next episode, but we hope that you guys are as excited as we are because MCAT math is so much fun to talk about. And it'll be fun to go over it in a podcast format too.
Because we've never done that before. And I hope that everyone, like after listening to the question strategy today, actually uses it. Right? Please, like I have to like push people all the time. I have to like convince them, like, please use the strategy. Because once they actually use it, they realize why it works.
Yeah.
Right. So please, again, don't just take the episode today and be like, okay, those are some good ideas. Use it. Use our question bank. It's totally free. Go use the strategy there. Use on the AMC questions if you have them, if you want, and try them out with the same intentionality paired with our passive strategy. And if you're like, I don't know what the passive strategy is, go back. It's like 2 episodes ago. Check it out. And I think anyone who's used these 2 strategies together perfectly, you're never going to get a question wrong. Like I can say that for certain. If you use them both perfectly, you will not get a question wrong.
That's a pretty bold statement, but it's
and I will stand by it. I can promise you, if you do the question perfectly, there is not a single question you can't get right. Not a single one.
Yeah. Well, on that lovely note, that very inspiring note, let's go ahead and wrap up. It has been a pleasure chatting with all of you guys today. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you're excited for MCAT Math next week or next episode. In the meantime, have a lovely rest of your day. Happy studying. And we can't wait until we see you next.
Till next time. See ya.
Bye.
Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT Podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash.